The note said 2 words, "Forget me." Declan had left it on the kitchen table in the house they had been building together, the house with the half-finished porch and the windows he had not yet hung, and he had saddled his horse in the dark and ridden south before dawn, and he had not looked back, because looking back would have broken what was left of him, and there was not much left. He had lost everything in a single week. The bank had called his construction loan after the lumber mill that owed him $600 went bankrupt. The lumber mill going bankrupt meant Declan could not pay the bank. Not paying the bank meant the house, the land, and the future he had been building for 2 years were gone. He was 31 years old and he owed more than he owned. And the woman he loved, Prue Calloway, who had waited for him to finish the house so they could marry in it, deserved better than a bankrupt carpenter with empty hands and a note on a table. So he left. He rode 400 miles south from Elm Fork, Kansas, to Silver Creek, Colorado, and he took a job in the silver mine because the mine did not care who you were or where you came from or what you had lost. It cared only that you could swing a pick for 12 hours and come back the next day and do it again. Prue found the note on a Wednesday morning. She had walked over from her father's farm with a basket of bread and preserves for Declan's supper, the way she did every Wednesday, and the door of the unfinished house was open, and his horse was gone, and the note was on the table, weighted down with the brass compass she had given him for his birthday. "Forget me." She read it twice. She set the basket down. She picked up the compass and put it in her pocket, and walked back to her father's farm, and sat on the porch, and thought for a very long time. And when she was finished thinking, she went inside, and told her father she was leaving in the morning. Her father, Hollis Calloway, was a practical man, who had raised his daughter to be practical too. He did not argue. He asked 3 questions. "Where are you going? How long will you be gone? Do you need money?" She answered, "South, as long as it takes. Yes." He gave her $40 and his best horse, and a letter of introduction to his cousin in Pueblo, and told her to be careful, and she said she would, and she meant it, and she left before dawn the next morning, because she had learned something from Declan Winslow, not the lesson he intended, which was that a man who loses everything should disappear, but a different lesson, which was that a woman who loves a man does not forget him because he asks her to. She finds him. It took her 3 months. She rode south through Kansas and into Colorado territory, stopping at every town to ask if anyone had seen a tall, dark-haired carpenter with a scar on his right hand from a chisel slip. Nobody had. She asked at liveries and boarding houses and saloons and churches and general stores, and nobody had seen him, and she kept going, because the alternative was to go home and accept the note, and she was not a woman who accepted notes. In Pueblo, she stayed with her father's cousin for a week, and rested the horse and washed her clothes, and studied a map, and decided that Silver Creek was the kind of town where a man who wanted to disappear would go. Remote, rough, full of transient miners who did not ask each other questions. She rode west into the mountains. The ride into the mountains was the hardest part. The road climbed through pine country and then above the tree line, where the wind cut like a blade and the snow lay deep on the passes. She wrapped herself in every piece of clothing she owned and talked to the horse to keep herself awake, and ate jerky and hardtack and drank snowmelt from her canteen, and did not stop except to rest the animal. There were nights when she slept on the ground under a rock overhang with the horse's saddle blanket over her and the cold going through her like water through cloth. And she thought about the note, "Forget me," and the anger kept her warm. She was not angry at Declan for losing his money. She was angry at Declan for deciding, alone, in the dark, without asking her, that she was the kind of woman who would leave a man because he was broke. She had never been that woman. She had grown up on a farm where money was scarce and love was not, and she knew the difference between what you could lose and what you could not. And Declan Winslow was in the second category, and he should have known that, and the fact that he did not know it made her furious enough to ride 400 miles in winter to tell him so. She found him on a Saturday afternoon in January. He was coming out of the mine shaft with a crew of men, covered in rock dust, his face gray and thin, his shoulders hunched in a way she had never seen before. The scar on his right hand was visible even under the dust. He looked 10 years older than the man who had left her 3 months ago. He looked like a man who had been punishing himself and was not finished yet. She was standing at the edge of the mine yard, beside her horse, in a riding skirt that was stiff with trail dirt and a coat that was too thin for the mountain winter. She had not planned what to say. She had ridden 400 miles, and she had not once rehearsed a speech, because she did not know what words would be right until she saw him. And now she saw him, and the only word that came was his name. Declan. He stopped. The other miners walked past him, and he stood in the yard with the rock dust on his face, and looked at her as if she were something his exhausted mind had invented, a hallucination born of cold and guilt, and the particular torture of loving someone you had chosen to leave. "No," he said. His voice was hoarse from the dust. "Prue, no. Go home." "I am not going home. I left that note for a reason." "You left that note because you are a fool." She walked toward him. She was shaking, not from the cold, though she was cold, but from 3 months of riding and searching, and not knowing whether she would find him alive, or dead, or married to someone else, or gone so far she could never follow. "You lost money, Declan. You did not lose me. You do not get to decide for both of us. I have nothing to give you. You have yourself. That is what I came for." He looked at her. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes were red-rimmed, and his hands, those carpenter's hands that had built her a porch and hung a door and carved her name into the lintel of a house that no longer belonged to him, were clenched at his sides. "Prue, I am living in a boarding house with 6 other miners. I earn $3 a day, and I owe the company store 2 of them. I smell like rock, and I taste like dust, and I have not built anything in 3 months. Then build something. Build it here or build it somewhere else. I do not care where, but you are not doing it alone, and you are not doing it without me, and you are not leaving me notes on tables and riding away in the dark like a coward. I am not a coward. Then stop acting like one." The miners who had been walking past had stopped walking. They were standing in a loose half-circle, watching, with the expressions of men who have seen a great many things underground, but have never seen a woman ride 400 miles to yell at a man for leaving her. Declan looked at Prue. She was thinner than when he had left. Her face was wind-burned, and her lips were cracked, and her hair was coming out of its braid, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And she was here. She had crossed 2 territories to find him, and she was standing in a mine yard in January, telling him he was a fool, and she was right. He was a fool. He had thought that losing money meant losing everything, and he had been wrong, because everything was standing in front of him in a dirty riding skirt, with $40 worth of determination, and 3 months of road dust, and the brass compass in her pocket. He reached for her. She stepped into him, and he put his arms around her, and held her, and she held him, and they stood in the mine yard with the rock dust settling around them, and the miners watching, and the mountain cold biting at their faces. And Prue said into his shoulder, "If you ever leave me a note like that again, I will find you faster." That evening they sat in the boarding house kitchen, after the other miners had gone to their rooms, and Prue took the brass compass out of her pocket and set it on the table between them. "You left this on the note," she said. "Why?" Declan looked at the compass. He had carried it for 2 years. She had given it to him on his 29th birthday, engraved with his initials on the back, and he had used it every day on the job sites, and it had become part of his hand, the way a good tool does. "Because I wanted you to have something of mine," he said. "Something that worked, since I did not. Declan Winslow, you are the most infuriating man I have ever known. I know. You left me a compass. A compass points the way home. You left me the thing that would lead me straight to you, and you thought I would not follow it?" He stared at the compass. He stared at her. He had not thought of it that way. He had left it as a keepsake, a goodbye, a piece of himself for her to hold after he was gone. He had not considered the possibility that Prue Calloway would pick up that compass and follow it 400 miles south like a needle following north. "I am a fool," he said. "Yes," she said, "but you are my fool, and I have ridden a very long way to collect you, and I am not leaving without you." He put his hand over hers on the table, and she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his, and they sat in the boarding house kitchen, with the lamp burning low and the compass between them, and for the first time in 3 months, Declan Winslow felt like a man who had a direction. He laughed. It was a broken, wet, exhausted laugh, and it turned into something else, something closer to crying, and she held him tighter and let him. They stayed in Silver Creek through the winter. Prue took a room at the boarding house, a separate room, because this was 1878, and they were not married yet, and she had been raised by Hollis Calloway, who had opinions about these things even from 400 miles away. She found work at the general store, and Declan kept working the mine, but now he came home to a lit window, and a warm meal, and a woman who asked about his day, and listened to the answers, and the gray went out of his face, and the hunch went out of his shoulders, and the carpenter's hands, that had been swinging a pick, started reaching for wood again. On Sundays they walked. Silver Creek was surrounded by mountains, and there were trails that wound through the aspens and along the creek that gave the town its name. And they walked those trails every Sunday afternoon, side by side, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the ride south, the cold nights, the wrong turns, the kindness of strangers who pointed her in the right direction, the moment in Pueblo when she had almost given up and then had not. He told her about the mine, the darkness, the dust, the men who worked beside him and never asked his name, the way the rock looked when the lantern hit a vein of silver and the whole wall glittered like something alive. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The mine?" "No, I miss the wood. I miss the smell of fresh-cut pine. I miss the way a joint fits when you have measured it right. I miss building things." "Then build things," she said, and it was so simple when she said it that he wondered why it had taken him 3 months of swinging a pick in the dark to understand what she had understood from the moment she read the note, that a man is not what he owes. He is what he makes. In March he built a shelf for the general store owner. In April he built a cabinet for the doctor. In May, the mine foreman asked him to rebuild the shaft head frame, and Declan looked at the drawings and said, "I can do this." And he could, and he did. And the foreman paid him 5 times what he made swinging a pick. By June, he had enough saved to rent a small shop on the main street of Silver Creek and hang a sign that said Winslow Carpentry. By August, the shop was full of commissions. By October, he was turning work away. On a cold Saturday in November, 1 year to the day after he had left the note on the table, he closed the shop early and walked to the general store, where Prue was counting inventory, and set a small wooden box on the counter. Inside the box was a ring he had made himself from a silver nugget he had found in the mine on his last day underground, shaped and polished and set, with a tiny garnet he had traded a cabinet for. "I cannot give you the house in Elm Fork," he said. "I can give you this, and I can give you my word that I will never leave you a note on a table again." Prue opened the box and looked at the ring, and looked at him and said, "Declan Winslow, if you had given me this ring a year ago, I would have said yes. I rode 400 miles and I still say yes. The answer was always going to be yes. You were the only one who did not know that." They were married in December by the preacher in Silver Creek, in the carpenter's shop that smelled of sawdust and varnish and new beginnings. Prue wore a dress she had sewn from cloth she bought at the general store where she worked, and Declan wore a clean shirt and the brass compass in his pocket. And when the preacher asked him if he took this woman, he said, "I do, and I should have said it a year ago, and I will say it every morning for the rest of my life, to make up for the time I wasted being a fool." Prue laughed. The preacher laughed. The miners who had come to watch, the same miners who had stood in the yard that January afternoon, cheered, and somewhere in the mountains the snow was falling, and the mine was dark, and the road between Elm Fork and Silver Creek was long. But none of that mattered, because the woman who had refused to forget him had found him, and the man who had tried to disappear had been built back by the only person who knew where to look.